Guys, welcome to episode number 2 of the Healthy Funnel podcast, the digital marketing podcast for healthcare providers. We are talking about who is right for you, and we're talking about audiences today and audience building. Alex, I'm super pumped. Might not sound like the sexiest title out there, but it is super important. And I'm just pumped to have you on here and to be chatting about this topic.
Man, I'm so excited about this, Will. Here, listen, guys. Y'all know that we're very action-oriented. We want to take you through like step-by-step processes, right? And now you're thinking, great, you're going to talk to me about my audience. And now I'm going to feel bad because I don't know who they are. Listen, this is the point where like you make your millions is right here, honing in on this. This is episode 1 of a large series that we're going to be starting here on the Healthy Funnel podcast about Facebook advertising in healthcare, okay? Over the course of multiple episodes, we're going to break it up into small chunks. We're going to get really deep in Facebook ads and understanding how to run them successfully because Facebook ads do work. We just finished up a campaign where with a client that we're going to talk about in a minute, we brought in over $4,000 of new business on just over $300 in ad spend on really a simple campaign. Like it wasn't that complicated, Will, was it?
It wasn't that complicated. In the advertising part of it wasn't that crazy, but it really only worked because we knew who we were trying to reach. And I think, Alex, I'd love to hear kind of your explanation because you're a great storyteller of sort of how this came about, right? Like the how did we actually create this campaign, which is actually generated into even more since we've connected with our client. But I think the interesting thing is it started with one place, and that was, who do you want to come into your clinic?
Yeah, and the great thing is, as we started thinking through this with this client, they were immediately on it. And this is why I feel like this was so successful. We sat down and we said, all right, let's talk about who for you is the perfect patient that you want to see. And our client said, her name's Rachel. And we went, whoa, what? Like, you already know this? She said, oh yeah. And she went on to describe Rachel. And Rachel is a woman who loves the outdoors. She loves to go skiing. She loves to go hiking with her dogs and her husband. And she's busy, but she wants to stay as active as she can. And she gets held back by injuries occasionally, right? And specifically, Rachel gets headaches. And so as we talk through it, it's like, now we see why Rachel, who has headaches, wants help with her headaches. But we'll talk about, I'm leaving out some crucial details here because we got so deep into Rachel. I was just blown away the first time that we thought through this with the client.
Yeah, I mean, it was wild. So we started asking a lot of questions about Rachel, trying to understand Rachel. And I think one thing to think about as we go through this exercise is that, Rachel is just the most specific of really what we're thinking of is sort of a range of what Rachel could be like, right? So someone who's going to fit into this category that's similar to Rachel, right? Obviously, we don't want to reach just Rachel because otherwise that would just be one person. But it's the idea of what is Rachel like? What are her behaviors like? Can we find similar people to her? And so we were asking questions, our client was really great. She was like, she's either married or she's engaged. She has one dog, right? And it's this kind of dog. She's like, she's likely like shopping at these stores X, Y, and Z. Yeah. We're like, great, man, that gives us a lot of things that we can reach out to in terms of language of how do you connect with someone, right? So for example, if Rachel is really health conscious, right, I don't want to tell a story about me at McDonald's when I got a headache, right? That's going to conflict. And I think that's really important that we know what's Rachel, what are her values, right? What is your audience's value? Like, what are their values? What are the things that make them tick, that are going to make them upset? Because it's equally as important, right? As you're going through this, and we're going to start reaching out to our clientele, to the people that we want to work with or draw into our world, we want to be able to communicate in their own language, but we have to know who they are first, right? And so that's where we dove in. I think it was so powerful in that she already knew so much about this, right? So we spent a lot of time coaching people. How do you figure it out, right? And I think a lot of people out there, we were talking about this before we jumped on, in that I think a lot of people have had to think about their audience, but maybe not to this degree, not to this level. So Alex, if someone's saying, you know what, I have a clinic, so far, all I've been thinking about is I just want anyone and everyone to come into my clinic. Where do we start?
So here's the thing. If you're aiming at anyone and everyone, such a broad target is going to appeal to no one, right? I mean, if you think about like Nike, if Nike was like, hey, anyone in the world who wears shoes, you should buy our shoes. That's like, no, they appeal to the people who are active and who want to take it on and just do it, right? Like they have a great target. And in this case with Rachel, the funny thing was by honing in on her, we got exactly her coming in through these ads. It was the funniest thing. Will, you and I experienced this. We have automated text messages coming in when we had new leads rolling in from this Facebook ad campaign. And we got, what was it, 3 days into the campaign, we got a text. Hey, new opt-in for this headache campaign. Rachel, here's her name, here's her phone number and her email. And we just laughed and it was like, hey, we found Rachel. And then it happened again. Hey, you got another Rachel. And as our client was laughing about that with us, she said, hey, I actually looked them up on Facebook. Look, they have dogs. They're outdoors. And it was like, wouldn't you know it? This stuff works. And it really was the funniest thing. We decided that Facebook is way too scary if it's able to literally bring us Rachel. But where do we start with this? That's the real question. First, you have to figure out, who in the world do I want to work with, right? Who is best suited to work with me? And I think that one of the easiest questions to ask yourself is, think of a patient that you really jived with. What was it about them that made you two connect so well? Is it that they were, 65 and you're a 34-year-old clinician, but you describe yourself as an old soul, so you just get along with that generation really well? Is it that they are a track athlete and you ran track in high school, so you just love working with them and it was just so natural? Think about, who was it that's natural to work with that you've seen before? And that's a great place to start. Will, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, so we want to balance out here, who do you want to work with, and then also who needs you and who potentially can also afford you, which is important to think about, right? You don't want to be the someone who wants to keep the older adult active, right? And then you're running a Facebook ad to 22 to 30-year-olds, right? Which sounds silly, but if we don't know what we're doing, happens, right? And we end up just spending this money, and it essentially goes to waste, right? It's not getting in front of the people we want it to go in front of. So I think it's really important you think about, who do you want to work with? Because ultimately, I think a lot of the happiness throughout your day comes from the people that you're spending time with, which is your patients in healthcare. And so you want to draw in the type of patient that you want to work with. And so I think a hard thing for us is to say, you know what, I prefer to work with this group, maybe not so much that group, right? Which is hard. As a healthcare provider, we want to help everyone. We want to be there for everyone. But when it comes to marketing and campaigns, which we're going to dive into, campaign-oriented strategies, which is essentially we're thinking about whether that's a pathology or a certain group of people, and we're going to market to that and not just these broad strokes. And so why that's so important is something like, if we had run that, so we should talk about real quick, with this campaign that we ran, right? This advertisement that we ran to Rachel, we used language that Rachel would use. Hey, do you feel overwhelmed because you're a busy professional woman during the holidays, right? So this is right around the holiday time. I can't put that ad in front of Rachel as well as Jim, the 32-year-old guy who is not a young professional overwhelmed woman at this time, right? It doesn't make sense. And if we try to just put an ad in front of, hey, do you get headaches? Here's to everyone. Well, now we're not speaking anyone's language. We're just speaking the language of, hey, do you have pain? And no one wants that. No one wants to admit that they have pain. I just think that's really important that we discuss that point, and that's why it's so important to figure out who you want to work with so we can speak to them in their language.
Yeah, completely. I want to try something here, Will. This is totally off the cuff. We didn't have this plan. I want to play a game, okay?
Let's do it.
If you're in the car, you're listening to the podcast, you're sitting at home doing homework, but listening to the podcast, or you're at the clinic listening to us, play along, okay? Heck, you can even pull out a piece of paper and see how quickly you can do this with us. All right. The game, Will, is we're going to rattle off as many categories as we can that we should be thinking about with our target customer, with our target patient. And we're going to alternate going back and forth. Okay. No more than 3 seconds. You got to give a next response within 3 seconds.
All right.
Or else you lose. Okay. here we go. So I want you to get thinking about it in your mind, categories that we're going to have in mind when we're thinking about who our ideal patient is. Okay. Will, you can start us off.
Income.
Age.
Gender.
Number of kids.
Married or single.
Kind of car they drive.
Favorite restaurant.
Where they live.
Injury history. Ooh, I didn't like that one.
It's all good. Favorite music group.
Ooh. Favorite. No, I'm not going to favorite. Let's go. Single story house, 2-story house.
Oh. Other healthcare providers they've seen before.
Ooh.
That may be a tough one. I'm just saying that may be tough.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a stretch.
Yeah, I like it. No, I'm really just buying time to get past the 3 seconds.
No, that's okay. I'm giving you time, man. I'm giving you as much as I possibly can.
Is their spouse active, physically active? Do they exercise with their spouse?
Ooh, shoot! Now I got to buy myself some time. Well, okay. So the one thing we talked about was income. I want to know individual income versus family income. I didn't know if I can play that card.
Yeah, play it. No, that's an extension. We'll count it. Yeah, shoot, that's a good one. Do they go to church?
Yes. Ooh, okay. I want to know what kind of learner they are. If they're a visual learner, or if they're a more auditory learner, which type of content I should be putting out.
Will they purchase things online?
That's a good one. Social networks that they're on the most, social media networks that they're on.
Ooh, I love it. Do they take care of their parents?
Ooh, man, that was so good. I want to know if they have specific likes and dislikes with what they put into their body, like food, like if they're really nutrition conscious or not. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
If they have kids, do they go to daycare, and does that bother them?
Ooh. When they go on vacations, are they the type of person who likes to go camping, and do they roughen it outdoors, or do they go on nice luxury vacations?
Does this person enjoy fixing their own household, hiccups?
Ooh,
are they a handy person?
This is piggybacking off that, so this is cheating. But are they a do-it-yourselfer, or are they a pay someone else to do it for them in their health?
Do they own their own business?
Oh, man. Okay. I feel like we could go on forever here. I'm copping out because I'm letting Will win. Will, you just won it.
It's definitely a tie.
I know. I hope that was like 3 minutes straight of that. So we just do that to show you how many things you could be thinking about with your target audience. Okay. I think it's good to be able to know the answers to those questions, because it will help you come up with wording in the future, with ad copy, the actual words that you're going to be using. So that if you know, hey, they always drive an SUV. Hey, do you have trouble stepping up into your car because of your hip pain? Right? Like that matters to someone who has an SUV, but not to someone who has a Toyota Corolla. So it's funny to think about that specific of a thing, I know, but it really helps you get to be in their head. And then once you come up with that, Will and I did something the other week that was sort of unintentional, but it worked so well. We had a pretend conversation with that ideal client. We had them come into the clinic, and you become your potential client right now and have someone else interview you and ask yourself, why did you come into the clinic? What brought you in here? Like, what made you make the decision to come in here? And then you, pretending to be your ideal patient, answer. And it gives you so much insight into what are they thinking? You know, what are their big problems? What are their big fears? What are their goals with seeing you? Do they care about preventing injury, or do they just care about the fact that their knee really hurts and they can't run right now? Right? Getting that type of depth into it just gives you a whole new sense of how you should be messaging to them.
That's a great point. Now, I think I love it. You know, maybe we should go real quick, a little philosophical in that. Marketing in general is about creating new, what we call leads. It's about creating, awareness of what you do. And so ultimately we need to know who is it that we want to bring in, because otherwise without that, we're essentially shooting fish in a barrel. And yes, you might hit a fish from time to time, but the consistency with which you can do it, which I think is what every business is striving for, right? How do we get consistent results? How do we get a consistent stream of people coming in? And I can tell you from my experience, the difference is the people who have a strategy and they know who they're reaching out to.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably some concern out there. Well, what if there's not enough of those people, right? And so we want to talk about a little bit, you want to have a range, right? We don't want to be so specific that it's, I don't want to define Alex to the point that he has to be 32 years old. He has to have knee pain, right? We want to be able to think, okay, I want to work with a younger population. We always go a 10-year window from between 10 to 15-year window. We usually don't like to go beyond 15. We don't like to go smaller than 10, especially as we're going to start diving into Facebook advertising. And I want to talk about the Facebook platform and why it actually, Alex, do you want to start with how the platform itself actually sets you up to have to think about your target audience?
Yeah, definitely. So Facebook has multiple metrics that it uses to measure people. The first one is age range, and you can go anywhere from, I think it's 18 all the way up to 65 plus. So define it within that. If you're advertising to anyone between 25 and 60, holy crap, that could be anywhere, right? So that's why we define that in. Next, it's going to ask you gender. It's going to ask you languages that they speak. It's going to ask you a radius that they live from your clinic or a zip code that they live within. But then it gets so deep into all these psychometric properties. So things like what's important to them, and I want to distinguish. There's two different ways that we can talk about our ideal client. One is their demographic information, age, where they live, et cetera. And one's that psychometric, where it's, what are they into? What stores do they shop at? What do they like to do for fun? So you have to think about both of those. And Facebook lets you split out both of those. And it even lets you say, hey, I want to have all of these people, but I don't want these people. And so when we get into targeting, we can figure out, do I want people who are, do I want a 34-year-old soccer mom, but I don't want anyone who maybe is, I don't know, this is terrible. I don't want people who like basketball for whatever reason. Okay. You could say that. You could totally do that. And so figuring out who it is and who it isn't is really important for Facebook. But I want to ask a question here, Will, because this is what pops into my mind when I think about this. Well, what if I serve 2 different audiences or 3 different audiences? Like, am I going to totally cast all of those aside now? Like, do I just say, screw it, like I'm throwing all those away? How do I rectify that?
Yeah, it's absolutely normal. And honestly, I think it's great. Really what we do is we replicate what we've done before. So we're going to take our audience. If you're listening, we've got Alex's daughter on the podcast.
She's here. She's making her second podcast appearance, you guys.
Oh my gosh. Is it Abby?
It is Abby.
Oh, Abby, welcome
she's
to
saying
the
hi
podcast.
to everyone. Can you say hi? Oh, she's up from the nap, you guys. Dad life right here, guys. Dad life.
Let's wrap it up real quick then. The answer to Alex's question is yes, you can definitely have, Alex's question was, how do we rectify this? So don't worry. This is just one way that we're gonna write this out for one group, and then we can replicate it for multiple target audiences, right? So let's say you don't want to just work with people with knee pain, right? And you don't want to have a campaign just for knee pain with 50 to 60-year-old people, right? But we want to work on the process and the formula first, which is, okay, great. I figured out what that 50 to 60-year-old person with knee pain, what they're thinking, where do they shop? What are their worries, right? Are they worried about walking with a cane? What their friends think about them walking with a cane? Are those real concerns? Because we want to speak to those concerns. And then, for example, well, maybe you really work well with them, and you also really work well with 20 to 30-year-old young athletes who, maybe your community, it's a really big football community, and you like working with the young football players. Great. How do we speak to them? Okay. And that's what we're going to keep diving into over this series is, as we dive into the strategy and the tactics, it's keeping in mind, how do we speak to this population? So it's not a cast away everyone. It's a system to create a formula to narrow down, how do you run one specific campaign? Great. Now let me use the same formula and strategy and replicate it for a different group of people. And that's how you can work with multiple audiences. The hard thing is we don't want to create language that tries to reach all of them at one time, because then we miss out on people. We're not speaking directly to their pain, to their concerns, to their worries, because the worries of a 50-year-old are different than the worries of a 21-year-old in college. And we know that, right? And that's why it's so important that we market. And you watch, a challenge for you is watch TV, watch the ads that come across, who they think about, who are they reaching, right? And sometimes why Facebook is so powerful, why social media is so powerful, and these advertising platforms is I get retirement commercials on my TV still. I have zero. I would love to be able to retire. I will not be thinking about that commercial for at least 20 to 30 years, barring any type of major injury, right? But Facebook, on the other hand, has all of this data, and it says, hey, don't send retirement advertisements to the 25 to 35-year-old crowd, right? We want to pick this apart. And that's where the data part of Facebook is so huge. And that's why knowing your audience is so important, because we now live in a time, only in the last 10 years or so, we have this data and these metrics to hone in exactly on who we're talking about. Alex, I feel like we should wrap it up soon. Any last comments? Talk about maybe what's coming up?
Man, I just want to leave people with the invitation to go actually write this stuff down. You've just talked through it. You've just thought about it. You're going to forget it. Okay. Make your own list of all those different, psychometric and geographic and everything data. How old is your target patient? Give them a name, Rachel. It helps you envision them. Write it down in one succinct place so that you have that all for future reference. Because next week, we're going to be getting into how do you give people what they want? And you're not going to be able to give them what they want unless you know who you're giving stuff to. So stay tuned for next week, where we're going to dive deep into understanding what the heck do people actually respond to. If I'm putting an offer out there, how do I know that they're going to take us up on that? Okay. That's what's coming up in next week's podcast, you guys. We're so glad you're here on the Healthy Funnel Podcast. We can't wait for this series. It's going to be amazing. You're going to love it. Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you later.